You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 8th of October 2024 on Monocle Radio.
Mexico's new president hopes the weather is not an omen. Iran's loss is the Taliban's gain, at least as far as overflight fees are concerned. And is it really art if a reasonable person can mistake it for the recycling? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Oscar Guardiola Rivera and Lynn O'Donnell will discuss today's big stories, and we'll hear from Central Media CEO Zoltán Varga about the challenges of keeping a free media functioning in Hungary. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Lynn O'Donnell, columnist for Foreign Policy magazine, and Oscar Guardiola Rivera, professor in international law and international affairs at Birkbeck College. Hello to you both.
Hi.
Lynn, first of all, you have recently, as I understand it, been traipsing the streets of New York City.
What? Pounding, striding.
Take your pick. What brought you there? Don't say a big aeroplane.
I went to do some work and to meet some people and do some interviews. And I really enjoy being in New York because, like London, really, it is such a walking and walkable city. Relentlessly urban, but I always find myself walking for ages and ages. And it is almost like London in that you go from village to village. Different areas of the city have their own personality and atmosphere and style. I like that.
Are you one of those visitors to New York, though? And I do tend to find they come in two kinds, who get struck by sort of wild, mad dreams of one day living there, or are you one of those people who thinks, yep, 96 hours will do, that was fun?
Oh, no, I can do a lot more than 96 hours. And I did seriously consider a little while ago living there. But like I said, the relentless urbanity of it compared to London's organic much more organic atmosphere and livability, London won out. You know, there's only one big park in New York, but in London, you can walk from park to park and get from one side of the city to the other, and I preferred that at the time.
No, I sympathise entirely. Living as I do, not far from the picturesque Arcadia of Wanstead Flats. Oscar, perhaps more helpfully to what we're shortly to be discussing, you have recently been to Mexico City itself. You got out before Hurricane Milton arrived, well timed. But what were your impressions of it this time?
It was very interesting because my time there coincided with both Independence Day and the change of government. And it was quite a spectacle to see 300,000 people gathering in the Zócalo to celebrate the nation's independence. It's not something you see, in most places, not even in Latin America, fiercely nationalist countries. But Mexico is really one apart.
Well, we will start in Mexico, which a little over a week ago swore in its first female president. Claudia Sheinbaum, for it is she, is a climate scientist by trade, which may position her to at least provide some educative context for the storm which has just clipped her country. Hurricane Milton, which roared across the Yucatan Peninsula en route Florida. The Gulf of Mexico is a reliable storm cauldron, and the consensus among President Sheinbaum's fellow climate boffins seems to be that while climate change is not resulting in more hurricanes, it does seem to be causing more powerful hurricanes, which I guess is the point. Does it strike you, Oscar, as somebody who was just there and witnessed the change of government, etc., is she going to take a lead on this? Has she foreshadowed that this is a thing she wants to make a thing of?
She's expected to take a lead on it because, as listeners might know, she is herself an energy engineer and a climate scientist. She worked pro bono on at least 2 climate change reports. And during her campaign, she was adamant about the need for Mexico to begin to move into more seriously into renewables. In fact, she promised an investment of $14 billion on this sector, which is significant given Mexico's, shall we say, if not dependence, at least, its clear economic ties to the fossil fuel industry.
Do we think, Lynn, she has much chance of actually being listened to if she does take a lead on this? I mean, this is an area in which, well, decades worth of politicians now have found it difficult to capture people's imaginations, or at least with practical policies that may actually improve things.
No. Well, no, really, I was thinking about this today, and I've become a real cynic about the oblivating that goes on around climate change. How long do we have to hear about and witness and experience for ourselves the very real consequences of inaction? And I'm getting to the point where I think that it's too late. Everybody wants to say that they're going to do something about it. And, I live in Westminster, one of the biggest and richest councils in London. And, I get recycling bins made of plastic. I mean, please, how sincere is anybody really about doing anything? And all of this stuff about moving to veganism, or, we have to grow soybeans. You still have to cut down forests to grow soybeans to feed the growing apparent appetite for tofu. I just get really bored with the bleating of do-gooders who do nothing.
Oscar, do you see, though, views evolving to more practical outcomes in Latin America, which is not that it's not a thing everywhere in the world, but it is, obviously, as Hurricane Milton demonstrates and as more intense hurricanes demonstrate, this matters very, very directly to Latin America in a way that it may not to countries in Europe, for example.
Absolutely correct. But Lynn does have a point in, expressing certain skepticism. In fact, today we had yet another report coming from a group of climate scientists telling us that, in a sense, it is already too late. We have already passed certain red lines, and they are beginning to look at the possibility of societal collapse. But on the other hand, you have to take into account the lived experience of Latin Americans. I mean, as we speak, this has not been as well reported as it should have in the press here in Europe. But the entire south of the Western Hemisphere is in flames. The wildfires that began in Amazonia, in Brazil, have now spread throughout the continent. As you were pointing out, the intensity of the hurricanes that we have seen arising in the Gulf of Mexico is unheard of. There are, in fact, now 3 of them, heading towards the west coast of the United States. So that entails a sense of urgency, the kind of which we might not feel here in Europe. In Brazil, for instance, they're going to complete 164 days without rain. That kind of drought is so. This is to say, climate change is not in the future, it's already here, and we're seeing its worst consequences as we speak. The problem is we're still thinking these will be solved by, individual choices, veganism, this or that. Of course not. This is a global problem. It has to be a global coordinated action. We still don't see that because let's be clear, the profit motive of the fossil fuel industries and the associated industries are still calling the shots.
Yeah, it's not just that, though, because a lot of the fossil fuel corporations have started to internalise that fossil fuels are not the future. And if they do want to continue to make profits, which they do, then they do need to start thinking about what is going to succeed fossil fuels. Is it not more the case, Lynn, and this is just what I've absorbed from trying to talk to politicians who do actually have to deal with this stuff, and especially when you chat to them without anything recording them, they will honestly admit that the difficulty is that this is complicated, it's boring, it's expensive, it requires people to make probably considerable sacrifices for outcomes which may not be manifest until we're all dead.
Yeah, I guess what you're saying is that politicians, against all evidence, are humans too. And of course they can, if they're intelligent people, they can see that things need to be done. But, as you were saying, there isn't any encouragement on a broad scale. The profit motive is the imperative, I think. And if you look at the newspapers today, there are stories about the Amazon drying up. 50% of global river catchments are being affected by drought. And these are rivers that provide water to most of the world's population. As you might recall, I spent summer in Karachi, where everybody there is baking in 50 degrees, but they've all got they've got the air cons on, which contributes to the further heating. So it becomes a vicious cycle, and I just don't think that the imperative on a personal, individual, neighbourhood, community level is great enough for people to actually make the changes that are needed. I do think that it's too late.
Well, we will turn now, on that upbeat note, to the Middle East after a fashion, where it turns out that the escalating hostilities are good news for someone, though the bad news is that it's good news for pretty much Earth's worst people. The Taliban are increasingly quids in as airlines flying between Europe and Asia decide that, what with one thing and another, they'd prefer to give Iranian airspace a swerve. Dozens of flights are now crossing Afghanistan every day, each one worth $700 to Afghanistan's Civil Aviation Ministry. Oscar, I did check this on Flight Radar or something of the sort earlier. As of when I wrote that paragraph, there are quite a lot of airlines still travelling over Iran, a lot of Russian airlines, but also Emirates, Fly Dubai, Air Arabia, Wizz Air and Ariana Afghan, God bless them, are still flying over Iran. Would you be keen on being on such a flight just at the moment?
I'm not planning to move anywhere in the next month or so. But it is the case. I mean, you just reminded me of the historian William Dalrymple once, who knows more than most about Afghanistan, once telling me, the Afghans tend to benefit from other people's travails. So here it is, once more. Another testimony to our lack of provision, a lack of foresight, all these wars. Of course they benefit someone, and usually they benefit, as you said, the worst people.
Lynn, I did wonder while you were here if you had any particularly illustrative Ariana Afghan Airlines anecdotes you may care to share with the listeners, because my own experience, I was almost disappointed. The only time I ever flew with Ariana, which was Dubai to Kabul and back in 2003, it was all actually entirely efficient, verging on downright pleasant, smooth landings and takeoffs in both directions.
Yeah, I think most Afghan airlines were okay unless they slammed into the side of mountains, which they did sometimes. And while I was working there as the bureau chief for the French news agency, the EU ambassador called me in for a scoop and told me that the European Union was banning all Afghan airlines from arriving in European airports simply because the maintenance was just so bad. Yeah. To be avoided unless you don't care,
But looking at Flight Radar, who is flying over Afghanistan, Oscar, I did spot British Airways, EVA, Air India, Lufthansa, Singapore Airlines, but they don't really, if you look at a map of the world, and especially given that nobody really wants to fly over Russia either, there's not a lot of option.
No, not really. Actually, Flight Radar shows an average of 147 flights per day traveling through Afghan airspace in the last months. That's considerable. Precisely given the fact that, as you pointed out, nobody really wants to go there. But it does tell you that business does. It carries on as usual.
Well, it does indeed. But Lynn, is there the Taliban, an organisation with which you are somewhat acquainted, do we anticipate them trying to, in the grand tradition of Afghan bargaining, try to add a few dollars to the price here, or might they seek this to use this as leverage to get more of the other stuff that they want/need?
Oh, the Taliban are a totally self-centred organisation. It's a big mafia, narco gang, let's face it. And so any money that they're going to make will go straight into their own treasury. The figures that I've got from the Taliban themselves is 265 flights a day at $700 each. That's a lot of money on a daily basis. But
it barely touches the sides given the amounts of money that Afghanistan actually needs, though.
No, but if they were really sincere about helping, doing what governments do and look after the people of the country, then they might dig into their own coffers, swelled over the years as they have been by heroin and now meth money, and spend money on schools and hospitals and poverty alleviation and feeding, the poor. But they don't do that. That's not what they're interested in doing. I think that the way they have used this overflight necessity that some airlines are finding, and the airlines have said that they have bowed to requests by pilots to fly over Afghanistan rather than Iran. I think that the Taliban will see this and spin this as they do most things, and that's as, see, we're a proper country, recognise us diplomatically.
Is there, Oscar, we're trying to be optimistic here, any prospect that you see that this kind of relationship of necessity could lead to some sort of constructive engagement with the Taliban to the extent that the Taliban can be constructively engaged with?
As Lynn would say, no. No, there isn't. And in fact, every UN person would tell you these days that the corridors that used to be open for that kind of diplomatic exchange are now closed. It's not just Afghanistan, pretty much the whole, Eurasia and Central Asia. We are in a perilous situation. Diplomatic channels are being closed off, and that is indeed problematic. The minute you stop talking, the guns do the talking.
Well, to Japan now, many of whose businesses take pride in a generally observed tradition of punctilious customer service. It seems, however, that not all Japanese customers are grateful. Abuse of the people who actually serve the customers has reached such a pitch, at least relative to Japan's decorous standards, that it has acquired a name, kasuhara, abbreviated from the Japanese expression for customer harassment. Authorities in Tokyo have now passed an ordinance designed to protect hapless service workers from the rage of punters and are considering extending it to public transport and call centres. Lynn, first of all, I'm tickled by the idea that customers of businesses in Japan are being driven to rage by standards of service. These people have not been to London, Paris or New York, have they?
Can you imagine it? But, how bad do things have to get in Japan when they're passing ordinances like this? Did somebody forget to wipe the escalator rail as they got on it, or didn't quite bow deep enough as they walked through the doors of the shop? I just can't imagine it, to be honest.
It is extraordinary, but it's also, many aspects of this are extraordinary, Oscar, but one of them is that though they have passed this ordinance, there are no actual penalties attached to it. The idea, and this is a wondrously Japanese conception, is that people will be sufficiently embarrassed by the prospect of even being brought to book under this ordinance. You don't need to fine them or lock them up.
I hope they are. And, I don't want to read too much into this story, but perhaps we're seeing a symptom of a deeper malaise, this global tendency to scapegoat and ragely react against others. I found this wonderful paragraph in the Japan news, which I would read just for the listeners' amusement. This is already an age of anxiety and stress. It has been said that society is becoming less tolerant. However, that does not mean that customers should be attacking employees.
Attacking would seem an overreaction, but Lynn, and this is a delicate area of etiquette. Are there circumstances in which it is permissible to take a somewhat abrupt line with somebody who is supposed to be doing the thing you are paying them to do?
Oh God! Everywhere you look, there's a sign that says, we take it very seriously if you abuse our employees, and that is an indication to me that the employees often deserve to be abused.
Oscar, have you ever hurled one of your magnificent hats onto the ground in fury at somebody behind a counter?
I did at someone who was abusing a Transport for London employee. I think TfL employees do deserve credit for what they do and for putting up with us here in London.
What were the circumstances?
Somebody was actually shouting at a lady. This somebody was a man, very big man. The TfL employee in question was a short woman, and she looked distraught. And I did took my hat and sort of slapped the gentleman on the side, saying, "Excuse me, I have to pass through. You get on with your business."
Lynn, they are talking about extending this ordinance to protect call centre workers. Can you claim a 100% record of never having in your entire life escalated the volume even slightly with a call centre worker?
I once, I got a call from somebody saying, you recently had a car accident. And I said, yes, I lost both legs, and they hung up.
That's great. I'm going to use that one.
But there is this idea, Oscar, and I do wonder if it does foster... If there's an overlap here between what ails our consumer sector and what ails our politics, it's just as there's this conventional wisdom that the customer is always right, and I think that overspills into this idea that we must always defer to the voter. But what if the customer's wrong, or the voter simply has no idea what they're talking about?
Come on, haven't we had enough proof of voters being wrong and customers being wrong? I mean, we might have yet another one come November in the US. No, voters are not always right, and customers are almost always wrong. We don't, as a philosopher friend tells me, we don't really know what we desire. We're told what to desire. So, do not believe on your own impulses.
And Lynn, just finally on this, because I think it's a thinking into which people lapse as they get a few decades on the clock, this idea that people are now less courteous than they once were in some almost certainly delusionally revered prelapsarian golden age. Do you think that is actually true? Have people become more obnoxious? I mean, we know they are online, but I'm talking in their sort of public dealings.
I doubt it. I think human nature is probably fairly consistently obnoxious. It's just now we have social media and cameras everywhere and everybody knows about it. You can't get away with it so much anymore, but I doubt that it's any worse now than it always has been.
I can see Lynn is a proverbial optimist.
Well,
a pragmatist, a realist.
To vindication now for anybody who has declared or suspected that the installation upon which they are being invited to reverently gaze in some or other gallery is in fact a load of rubbish. At the LAM Museum in Lisse, a settlement in the Netherlands, someone tossed 2 discarded dented beer cans into the bin, only to be told they had in fact thrown away a work by French artist Alexander Lavette entitled All the Good Times We Spent Together. The cans were recovered before being consigned to the compactor, although could obviously have been replaced at the nearest off licence. Lynn, this is somewhat unfair on the artist. Somewhat. I mean, the cans were, as I understand it, hand-painted to sort of replicate the original livery of the cans concerned, and obviously some thought and technique and skill has gone into that. But nevertheless, where are you on modern art of what we will refer to as this nature?
I think on this particular exhibit, there were only 2 cans, so not a lot of good times were really had. And they were in a lift, and, I'd like that cleaner.
Well, indeed.
That was my reaction, exactly. Only 2 cans? That wasn't a good party.
Well, exactly. And you cannot fault the dedication to his craft of the cleaner. I did look into the works of Mr. Lavette a little further, Oscar. There are also some discarded pyjamas entitled Why Can't We Sleep? A pile of books called Sondoku, which I assume means something in Japanese, and also renderings of receipts, tickets and fast food bags called corpus. Do you cleave to the belief, the Marcel Duchamp belief, I think, that everything is kind of art if framed in a certain context?
Not at all, and that's unfair with the sound. Not everything is art. It is true that, we're in this crisis of evaluation and people think everything goes. Not indeed. In fact, this was either an honest mistake. The person who threw the cans did not look closely enough. He or she would have noticed that they were meticulously hand-painted, as you pointed out, or else it was a curatorial mistake. I do believe that the curator of the museum did not think, properly about where to put them. In fact, the two cans were thereafter replaced on a plinth. Mm-hmm. But then they said, but that misses the irony of this artist. In fact, I would invite listeners to think about where the real question is, where do you put art? Because is art what you put on a gallery, on a plinth? Is it ceases to be art if you put it in the lift? Perhaps we should rethink what do we do with our museums and galleries. We need more art out there in the streets.
There is a rich history, Lynn, of artworks being erroneously dispensed with. In 1986, it says here, the Academy of Fine Arts in Dusseldorf, a cleaner mopped up a grease stain by Joseph Bayes, worth 400,000 euros. He just thought it was a mess. There was that incident in Seoul last year when somebody just helped himself to a banana which had been taped to a wall. He said, not implausibly, he was hungry. I don't like to be sort of crotchety Philistine type. I really don't. But if your artwork can be reasonably mistaken for rubbish by the reasonable person, is it really art?
By a cleaner who doesn't know what art is but knows what he likes?
Yeah.
Well, art is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? Mm. Apparently, or why didn't a cleaner come along and make Tracy Emin's bed? Probably would have taken too long. I think that we have stretched the parameters of what is fine art, but I defer to curators and people with deep pockets who know their art better than I do.
Well, on that thought, we did want to close our panel by inviting you each to indulge your inner Philistine. Oscar, first of all, is there an item of art or an oeuvre by a particular artist that you would in fact quite cheerfully see heaved into the skip? The correct answer is obviously Banksy, but you can choose others.
Well, you read my thoughts, but that's exactly. This is perilous to say this on radio because you invite all sorts of hate, but I don't like Banksy.
No. I think there's a very fine line between his artworks and those sort of whimsical affirmations in florid text that people hang on the walls of insufferable cafes.
Brilliant graffiti that I would rather qualify as art.
Lynn?
Well, I kind of think that art is categorised within its context, and Banksy caught the imagination of the British public and that spread globally. So, yeah, okay, if people want to consider that is art rather than graffiti or doodlings or postcard, I think it's the stuff that you should put on postcards, for instance, wish you were here, whatever. Commanding millions and millions of dollars. Well, art has become a route for money laundering, and maybe that's the purpose that it serves now.
On that happy thought, Lynn O'Donnell and Oscar Guardiola Rivera, thanks both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, Zoltán Varga is the CEO of Central Media, one of Hungary's leading independent media companies, with top-selling magazines such as Nok Labcha, the most read weekly women's title in the country. He's also an investor in Poland's Gremi Media. A fierce advocate of a free press, Zoltán speaks now to Monocle's Fernando Augusto Pacheco about the importance of independent media, the current Eastern European market, and the future of print.
Frankly, I used to be a private equity investor and I thought it's a good deal. So we invested in the media 10 years earlier, and we realized later on that, first of all, it's unique. It's media. Second, it has a huge impact, not only politically, but sociologically, empathically. I think it's very important what we write, how we write. So we are shaping actually the people's life and how the people think about the common speech. And I think it's important how we drive, whether we are able to drive actually the mental health of the society. And third, later on we realize it's a kind of trap taking into consideration the political environment. First of all, we wanted to sell the assets at a good price, but we realized if and when we would like to keep the independent free media alive in a big scale in Hungary, we have to protect central media, and it has to be a good hands. So that's why we still believe that a central media is still in the best hands, and that's why we didn't sell it to the government-related people, because we fear that the independence of the Hungarian media market will be disturbed even more, or will be destroyed even more. So I think media and central media became a passion for us. So it's a pretty much mission-driven investment. And after a few years, we realized if and when we would like to survive and we would like to keep our aim and targets and then vision to protect in the media, we have to grow. So we cannot stay only in Hungary, and we realized that there's a path actually to create a Central East European media company in a big scale, which will actually will have a unique voice. And I think with the Eastern European thinking, we can turn things around even in Western Europe, and we can influence the public speeches actually in the European Union as well. So that's why we invested in titles in Slovakia, Czech Republic, and last year we invested in Poland, where we became a shareholder in Grammy Media, which is the publisher of Rzeczpospolita, the largest and the most respected newspaper and the oldest newspaper in Poland. We are very proud being an owner of Rzeczpospolita. And earlier we invested in education in Poland. It's called SIP. It was the education business where we actually were competing with Sanoma. So Sanoma has an entity called the Nova Era in Poland, and we were competing. But as things turned positive in Poland after the elections, which were held in October last year, and the new government came on board, the stock exchange and the asset prices reflected actually those changes. So they are significantly higher, and more people came actually to invest in Poland. And we met actually one of the industry leader in this respect, and he acquired the business from us. It's called Infinitas Group. They are present in several countries in Europe, and they are one of the largest education business provider. So we exited, but at the same time we are building our media business in Central Eastern Europe. So we are not satisfied only with 4 countries, so we're looking the opportunities further in Slovakia and in many other countries. Why I'm specifically mentioning Slovakia? Because the political changes which took place last year, they are very much hurting the independence of the media and actually blocking kind of the free speech. I think it's a buying opportunity for us. We learned in the past 10 years how to operate, how to fight against the government or oppression. So that's why we are kind of used to operate in such circumstances. It's not easy. There are daily threats in the Slovak market. And for instance, what we experience so far in Hungary, that we don't have any revenue from the state, for instance. The Hungarian state is the biggest advertiser on the market, but believe it or not, we have 0 revenue from the state. And we still survive, we are flourishing, we are a profitable company because we have fantastic titles, good colleagues, so we are faring well, relatively compared to the headwind. But we feel that we kind of adapted to these circumstances. That's why we can easily adapt to circumstances which are completely new in Slovakia. So what we learned actually in Hungary, we can accommodate in other countries. It's a kind of sad story because you don't want to accommodate things which happened actually lately in Hungary. But we have to, so that's the reality.
That was Zoltán Varga speaking to Fernando Augusto Pacheco. You can listen to that interview in full on this week's episode of The Stack on Monocle Radio. That's all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Lynn O'Donnell and Oscar Guardiola Rivera. Today's show was produced by Monica Lillis and researched by George Ruskin. Our sound engineers were Elliot Greenfield and Lily Austin. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.